There were over 500 people in the ballroom that night: doctors, hospital board members, philanthropists, even 2 local news anchors. The chandeliers glittered like 1,000 tiny cameras, catching every sip of champagne, every polite laugh, every quiet judgment. The gala was a celebration of legacy of the Morgan family's contributions to medicine, to the hospital, to the community. And at the very center of it all sat Dr. Celeste Morgan, me mother-in-law. Regal, untouchable, magnetic in a way only people used to being worshipped can be. I stood by the wall, a glass of untouched white wine in my hand, scanning the crowd for my daughter. Lila had been quiet all evening. She hadn't complained, hadn't tugged at my dress, hadn't asked when we could go home. That alone should have been a sign. And then I saw her. She was walking marching up the side of the stage. Her little gold shoes tapped against the hardwood in slow, deliberate beats. Her sparkly headband shimmered beneath the spotlight. In one hand, she held a small red box. In the other, a microphone. At first, no one noticed. The room was too loud with applause for Celeste's latest endowment. But when Lila's voice came through the speakers clear, calm, and chilling, the entire room froze. "Grandma," she said, steady and unwavering, "Daddy told me to give you this if you ever ignored me again, and I think you just did." You could hear the gasp ripple like a wave. The band stopped playing. Chairs creaked as people twisted to look. I couldn't move. Neither could Nathan. Celeste's smile cracked like a porcelain plate dropped from a height. Lila didn't flinch. She walked to the center of the stage, set the box on the podium, and stepped back like she was handing over evidence in a trial. Then she looked out at the room, not scared, not ashamed, just ready. That was the moment I knew. She wasn't asking to be seen anymore. She was demanding it. My name is Avery Morgan, and for the past 6 years, I've lived in the shadow of a family whose last name I share but whose love I was never truly invited into. I married Nathan Morgan when my daughter, Lila, was just 2 years old. Her biological father was long gone, left without looking back. Nathan came into our lives like light through stained glass, soft, unexpected, beautiful. He didn't just love me, he loved Lila. Fully, patiently, without question. When he adopted her, he held her hand through every court meeting, every signature, every anxious waiting room breath. And from that day on, there was never a step in front of daughter. She was his, in every way that mattered. But in the Morgan family, bloodlines mean everything, especially to Celeste. Dr. Celeste Morgan, venerated surgeon, philanthropist, hospital board chair, my mother-in-law, a woman with accolades longer than most resumes and a heart seemingly too small to stretch beyond the bounds of DNA. At first, she was polite, cordial, distant but not unkind. She smiled through our wedding photos. She sent Lila a picture book for her 3rd birthday, no card, no message, just a book, still in its shrink wrap. She referred to Lila as Nathan's little one, never our girl, never granddaughter. At first, I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being sensitive, that if I worked harder, cooked for more dinners, showed up early to family brunches, dressed Lila in the bows Celeste liked on other girls, maybe she'd come around. She didn't. Over the years, the distance only grew colder. The silences became more intentional. The group photos always seemed to cut Lila out by accident. The Christmas stockings on the Morgan fireplace? Everyone had one embroidered, stuffed, and hung with care. Lila's stocking was never there. Not even once. Nathan noticed. Of course he did. He just didn't know what to do with it. "She doesn't mean to be cruel," he'd whisper at night. "It's just tradition," she said in her ways. Tradition. As if love required a pedigree. I began to shrink. Not all at once, but in the quiet ways women do when they're trying not to rock the boat. I stopped correcting Celeste when she introduced Lila as Nathan's child. I laughed off the passive comments. I stood behind Nathan at family events like an accessory, smiling through gritted teeth. I told myself I was protecting Lila. That stability was more important than acknowledgement. That maybe love didn't need to be loud to be real. But then I started to see it in my daughter. She began to sit quieter at family dinners. She stopped bringing handmade gifts to holiday events. She never asked why her name wasn't on the invitation, she just assumed it was a mistake. And I realized, with a slow ache in my chest, that my silence had become her blueprint. She was learning how to make herself smaller from me. And that terrified me, because while I had chosen to be silent, she was being taught to accept it. And I knew then, if I kept letting this happen, I wouldn't just lose my voice, I'd help take away hers too. That's when everything began to shift. The Morgan family prided themselves on legacy. It was in the way they spoke, measured, articulate, always slightly performative, like every sentence was being drafted for a press release. It was in the photos lining the staircase of their lake house for generations of white coats, med school graduations, charitable gala appearances. It was in the family motto, stitched into a mahogany plaque in the dining room. Excellence by blood, honor by name. That plaque used to make me laugh. Now, it made my stomach tighten every time I looked at it. Because in this family, blood wasn't just a metaphor, it was a currency. And my daughter didn't carry the right lineage. Celeste ruled that house like a courtroom. Nothing escaped her noticeable settings, posture, vocabulary, which wine was paired with which course. Her compliments were rare and delivered like favors. Her critiques were dressed in silk, but sharp enough to cut. And everything she did was subtle. That was the worst part. She never shouted, never scolded. She simply excluded. A gentle oversight here, a forgotten RSVP there, a vague, "Oh, I didn't realize," when Leela's name was left off a birthday list. And when I brought it up gently, cautiously, Celeste would tilt her head and smile. "Oh, Avery, you're overthinking again. You always take things so personally." I began to doubt myself, to second-guess every feeling. I was being gaslit with grace and champagne. But Lila? She saw it, even if she couldn't name it yet. She saw it when all the Morgan grandchildren received matching monogrammed lab coats at Christmas mini replicas of their parents' white coats. Lila's package wasn't there. Celeste smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, honey, we didn't want to assume. We didn't know if she'd want one." Assume? She was family, wasn't she? Then there was the summer lake house trip. Each grandchild got their own room, complete with welcome baskets. Celeste handed Maddie a new tablet, Lucas a GoPro. Lila was given a travel toothbrush kit and a water bottle with a hotel logo still on it. "You'll want to stay hydrated, sweetheart," she chirped. Lila said thank you. Of course she did. But that night, as I tucked her into the pull-out sofa in the basement while the other kids slept upstairs in themed rooms, I saw her eyes, wide open, staring at the ceiling. "Mom," she whispered, "am I visiting?" It broke something in me, because it didn't matter how many dresses I ironed, or how early we showed up with side dishes, or how polite Lila was never going to be enough. Not for them, not for her. Celeste didn't just disapprove of our presence, Ash curated it. Carefully, consistently, with just enough plausible deniability to call it accidental. But it wasn't. She was sending a message. And the rest of the family? They received it loud and clear. No one questioned it. No one intervened. Because no one wanted to be on the wrong side of Celeste. So we learned to navigate the Morgan gatherings like a maze, sidestepping insults, managing optics, pretending not to notice the polite cruelty served alongside the hors d'oeuvres. But Lila was getting older, and the more she learned to decode the silences, the less I could justify them. It happened at what was supposed to be a simple dinner. Nothing extravagant, just a small family gathering at a downtown steakhouse to celebrate Maddie's promotion to junior ambassador for some youth medical initiative. Celeste had booked the private room weeks in advance. There were name cards in gold script, floral centerpieces, and personalized menus with the Morgan crest printed at the top. Even the bread had a monogrammed butter stamp. We walked in right on time. Nathan in a charcoal suit, me in a navy dress that Celeste had once said looked appropriately conservative, and Lila bright, eyed, in her favorite lilac sweater and silver flats. She had brought a small card she made for Maddie. She even asked me to help her practice what to say when she gave it. But from the moment we entered, something felt wrong. Lila's name wasn't on the table. Every other grandchild had a seat with a handwritten card tucked into a miniature frame. Maddie's seat had a crystal tiara next to it. Lucas's had a set of AirPods. Even the youngest, Emma, barely 5, had a little plush stethoscope draped over her chair. Lila? There was a folding chair at the far end, squeezed between the side buffet and the wall. No frame, no gift, no place setting. I looked to Nathan. His eyes flickered toward Celeste, then away. No one said anything. No one apologized. It was as if Lila's seat had materialized from nowhere and didn't warrant explanation. She didn't cry. Instead, she stood a little straighter, walked over, and quietly placed her handmade card next to Maddie's dessert spoon. Maddie glanced at it, mumbled a quick, "Thanks," then turned back to her phone. The dinner carried on like that. Polite, predictable, poisonous. Celeste toasted to the next generation of Morgans and praised each grandchild by name except Lila. Not once. No slip of the tongue, no casual acknowledgement, just a clean erasure. And the worst part? I said nothing. I sat there, cutting Lila's chicken into bite-sized pieces, as if I hadn't just watched my daughter be publicly edited out of a family she was legally part of. Emotionally invisible. Systematically excluded. Later that night, in the car, Lila stared out the window the whole way home. We were halfway across the bridge when she spoke. "Mom?" she said quietly. "I don't think Grandma forgot me." I turned in my seat. "What do you mean?" "She always remembers the other kids," she said, still watching the lights ripple across the water. "She doesn't forget things. I think she just didn't want to." It hit me so hard, I couldn't breathe. Because my daughter wasn't naive anymore. She wasn't guessing. She was seeing it clearly, painfully, and saying it out loud. And suddenly, all the things I had whispered to myself. Maybe she didn't mean it. Maybe next time will be different. Maybe we're overthinking it. They didn't just feel like lies. They felt like betrayals. I had tried so hard to protect Lila's peace by pretending the wounds weren't there, when in reality, she'd been bleeding quietly for years. That night, as I tucked her into bed, she didn't ask for a story. She just held my hand and said, "It's okay, Mom, I know you tried." But her voice wasn't forgiving. It was final. Like something had shifted inside her. And maybe only inside me, too. The night after that dinner, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside Nathan, staring up at the ceiling, listening to the soft rhythm of his breathing. The room was dimly lit by the glow of the street lamp outside, and the silence between us felt louder than any argument we'd ever had. Finally, I whispered, "You saw it, right?" He didn't respond. I turned to face him. "Nathan, you saw what happened tonight." He sighed, just a small exhale, but it said everything. The kind of breath people take when they're already bracing for the weight of your disappointment. "She's just old-fashioned," he muttered. "She didn't mean to hurt her." "She put Lila at the end of the table," I said, my voice rising despite myself. "On a folding chair. No gift, no name, no seat. She erased her in front of everyone." Nathan rubbed his temples. "Avery, please, not tonight." But it was tonight. Because how many more nights would I keep letting this happen? How many more nights would I lay next to a man who saw his daughter being treated like a stranger and still said nothing? I sat up. "Do you understand what this is doing to her? What it's doing to me?" He looked at me then. Really looked. His eyes were tired, maybe from work, maybe from the burden of being caught between the two people he loved most. "I do," he said softly. "But I don't know how to fix it." -1. "You speak up," I said. "You draw a line. You tell your mother that Lila is your daughter, not just on paper, not just in court, but in every way that matters." He was quiet. Again, that awful, deafening kind of quiet that leaves you feeling more alone than any distance ever could. And in that silence, I realized something brutal. Nathan wasn't a bad father. He wasn't a cruel husband. He was just conflict averse, terrified of confrontation, addicted to harmony. So much so that he would rather keep the peace with his mother than protect the little girl who looked up to him every single day. And that's when I began to feel it, not anger, but grief. Grief for the woman I had become in this house of polite omissions. Grief for the wife who once believed that if she just loved hard enough, everything would work out. Grief for the mother who now understood that her daughter's safety, emotional, spiritual, and human, wasn't something that could wait for Nathan's timeline anymore. The next morning, he kissed my cheek on the way to the hospital like nothing had happened. Lila waved from the breakfast table, her toast untouched, her eyes guarded. And I smiled back. But inside, I was already somewhere else. I was beginning to plan. Not an exit. Not yet. But a boundary. Because if Nathan couldn't draw the line, I would. For Lila. For me. For the version of myself I was slowly losing in the silence. It started with a photo. One I had nearly deleted out of instinct, back when the wound was fresh and I still believed pretending could protect us. But something told me to keep it. It was taken the day Nathan signed the adoption papers. Lila was wearing her sparkly unicorn dress, 2 sizes too big because she'd insisted on picking it out herself. Her cheeks were smeared with vanilla frosting. Her arms were wrapped around Nathan's neck as if letting go would make the moment disappear. I remember snapping the picture and thinking, this is the day everything becomes official. The day no one can question who she belongs to. But I was wrong. Because belonging isn't just something you prove in court. It's something you have to defend over and over again when people decide they get to draw the lines. And so, one night, after Nathan had gone to bed, I printed that photo again. I slipped it into a white frame. Then I opened the locked drawer in my desk and began collecting everything I wished I never needed. I printed a certified copy of Lila's adoption. Certificate signed, sealed, legal. I added the hospital discharge paperwork from the week she had pneumonia, and Nathan stayed up 3 nights in a row by her bed, reading Goodnight Moon on repeat because it was the only thing that calmed her. I tucked in a drawing Lila made in kindergarten of our family. Me, Nathan, and her holding hands under a giant heart. She had written Daddy above Nathan's head in crooked bubble letters. And last, I wrote a letter. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even long. But it was clear. It said, if you're reading this, it means you've made my daughter feel like she doesn't belong. Again. Not by accident. Not in passing, but by choice. And if she has chosen to give you this box, then I trust her judgment more than I trust your intentions. Lila is not a guest in this family. She is our child, our daughter. She is not temporary. She is not Nathan's stepkid. She is a Morgan by name, by law, by love, and by her own strength. If you cannot see her, you will not see us either. I read it twice, then sealed it inside a white envelope and placed it under the framed photo. I wrapped everything inside a red boxed jewelry box from an old Christmas gift Celeste once gave me. I thought the symbolism might be lost on her, but it wouldn't be lost on me. Then I handed it to Lila. She looked up at me with curious eyes. What's this for? I crouched down beside her. This is yours, I said softly. You don't have to open it. You don't even have to think about it unless one day you feel like you need to remind someone who you are. She didn't ask many questions, just nodded once and placed it carefully in the back of her closet, like it was made of something sacred. And then we never spoke of it again. For months, the box sat untouched, but I knew it was there, waiting, not as a weapon, not as a threat, but as a boundary. Because when words fail and silence becomes complicity, sometimes a child needs something to hold in her hands that says, you matter. And if they won't say it, this will. The gala was held at the Charleston Grand Atrium, a towering glass structure wrapped in gold light and good intentions. Crystal chandeliers, endless champagne, silk tablecloths, and name tags embroidered in metallic thread. It was Celeste's crowning jewel of the year, a black tie fundraiser for pediatric neurology, hosted by the Morgan family and attended by everyone who was anyone in the medical world. I'd helped behind the scenes for weeks proofreading brochures, finalizing seating charts, organizing auction items. I wasn't thanked, of course. That would have required acknowledgement. But I did it anyway, because that's what you do when you want your child to belong somewhere. You show up over and over, hoping one day someone will make space for her. That night, Lila wore her favorite gold dress again, the one she called her brave dress. She asked me to curl her hair into soft waves and carefully place the glittery headband she wore the day of the adoption ceremony. I knew she remembered, but I didn't know just how much she had planned. We arrived a few minutes early. Celeste greeted Nathan with a well-rehearsed smile and an air kiss. She nodded in my direction and barely glanced at Lila. "You look shiny," she said to her, as if that was enough. Lila blinked once. "Thank you," she replied quietly. The night unfolded like all Morgan affairs. Elegant, curated, cold. Nathan was ushered toward a group of surgeons. Celeste fluttered between board members. I stood by the hors d'oeuvre table, watching Lila sit alone at the edge of the children's section. The other kids, Maddie, Lucas, Emma, were laughing over a photo booth near the stage. Lila had been handed a name badge that read simply guest. Not Morgan. Not family. Just guest. During dinner, Celeste took the mic and began her speech, gliding through a list of achievements, thanking the donors, and honoring the next generation of Morgans making an impact. She spotlighted each grandchild, calling Maddie a future neurosurgeon, Lucas, the scientist, and Emma, our little ambassador. All down. No mention of Lila. Not even a glance. And then came the final moment, the Legacy Lights ceremony, where each child was brought to the stage and handed a symbolic gift representing their potential. Maddie received a custom lab coat embroidered with her initials. Lucas was given a microscope set engraved with the Morgan crest. Emma got a silver necklace shaped like a brain. Then Celeste paused, glanced briefly in Lila's direction, and said into the microphone with a tight smile, "And, lastly, we didn't want anyone to feel completely left out, so here's something for Nathan's daughter." She held up a plain lavender candle in a cardboard box. No ribbon. No card. Just a barcode still on the bottom. Lila didn't flinch. She stood up, walked slowly toward the stage, and kept walking, past Celeste, to the podium. And before anyone could stop her, she took the mic. At first, no one moved. There, she was 8 years old, standing under 1,000 lights in a room full of surgeons, scholars, and silver forks. Her gold dress shimmered like it had been sewn from sunlight. Her hands gripped the microphone like it was heavier than it looked, but her face was calm, still, certain. Celeste froze behind her. Nathan stood halfway between his table and the stage, mouth parted, unsure whether to intervene or let her speak. I stood completely still, one hand over my heart, the other clenched at my side. And then Lila's voice rang out. Clear. Steady. Soft enough to be gentle, loud enough to be unforgettable. "Grandma," she said, turning to look Celeste in the eye. "Daddy told me to give you this if you ever ignored me again." Gasps swept the room like a gust of wind. Celeste blinked, her smile strained but holding. "What's this, sweetheart?" she asked, gesturing to the small red box Lila now held up for everyone to see. Lila didn't answer. She placed the box gently on the podium, deliberate, like placing an offering or evidence, and stepped back. Then she returned the mic to its stand, turned, and walked off the stage without another word. No dramatics. No tears. Just a quiet reclaiming of space. Nathan reached for her as she stepped down, but Lila moved past him, returning to her seat beside me. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. The room stayed silent. Even the background music had stopped. All eyes turned to Celeste, who now held the red box like it might explode. Slowly, she peeled back the paper, lifting the lid. Her brows furrowed as she pulled out the framed photo, first Nathan holding Lila on the day of her adoption, the words "Day One Dad" inscribed in gold beneath their smiling faces. A few guests clapped, instinctively unsure of what they were applauding, but moved nonetheless. Then came the envelope. She opened it, and the shift on her face was almost imperceptible at first. A twitch in the jaw, a flicker in the eyes. Her mouth moved as she read silently, line by line, her hands trembling slightly by the end. I knew every word of that letter. I had written it, but it wasn't my voice that echoed in that ballroom, it was Lila's. Celeste's lips pressed into a thin line. She looked up at the crowd, at the cameras, the guests, the legacy she'd built in for a moment. I saw something I never thought I would. Fear. Not because of Lila, but because a mirror had finally been held up to her power and the cracks were starting to show. She dropped the letter like it stung, her hands falling to her sides. "I can't believe you'd embarrass me like this," she hissed, looking toward Nathan, her voice shrill with panic. But Nathan didn't move. Not toward her, not to her defense. Instead, he stepped beside me and placed a hand on Lila's shoulder. "We didn't embarrass you," he said calmly. "You did that all by yourself." Celeste's face crumbled. She looked around for support, for control, for someone ready to rescue her from the consequences of her own behavior. But there was only silence. That, and the quiet rise of a child who had just told the truth in front of everyone who had once looked right through her. Celeste stood alone under the spotlight. She was still holding the red box like it had betrayed her, like the weight of it had changed midair and revealed itself to be something far more dangerous than a child's rebellion. It was truth. Wrapped in ribbon and delayed for months, but truth nonetheless. The room remained hushed. A few people shifted in their chairs. A waiter froze mid-step, tray of empty glasses trembling slightly in his hands. Nathan didn't blink. I didn't breathe. And then, with a slight twitch of her fingers, Celeste pulled out the next item from the box, of photograph, framed in white. She looked at it for a long moment. The flicker of her eyes said it all. It was Nathan, sitting in a hospital chair, scrubs still wrinkled, holding a toddler with frosting on her face and chubby hands clutching his collar. That photo had been taken the day Lila was officially adopted. The caption, in gold script, read, "Day One Dad." There was no one else in the photo. Just them. No spectacle. No Morgan crest. Just a father who had chosen his child. Celeste's fingers trembled as she set the frame on the podium, as if even that act betrayed her composure. Then she reached into the box again and pulled out the sealed envelope. It was heavy, thicker than it looked. She paused. She could have walked away, closed the box, smiled politely, and pretended it had all been a misunderstanding, a sweet but misguided gesture from a child who didn't understand her place. But she didn't, because something in the room had shifted. The oxygen, the temperature, the tolerance. She opened the envelope. Inside were the certified adoption papers, signed by a judge. Nathan's name printed clearly under father. The state seal stamped in blue and gold. There was no room left for ambiguity. Celeste blinked hard, once, twice, like she was trying to wake herself up from a dream-turning nightmare. A few gasps echoed across the tables. A man near the front whispered something to his wife. Someone else reached for their phone under the table. But then came the final blow. She unfolded the handwritten letter. Lines and curves in Nathan's familiar handwriting. She read silently. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. And slowly, I saw the color drain from her face. The lines on her forehead tightened. Her mouth curved downward, not in sadness, but in something far older, far deeper. Shame. The kind that comes when the truth doesn't just knock on your door, it kicks it off its hinges. When she reached the end, her hand lowered to the podium. She didn't fold the letter, didn't hide it. She just let it fall. Like it burned. Like holding it any longer might scar her permanently. The room remained frozen. Somewhere, a fork dropped against a porcelain plate and echoed like thunder. Celeste looked up at me, at Nathan, at Lila, who sat with her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the stage, but not afraid. Just steady. And that's when Celeste said the thing that would unravel the last of her image. "I can't believe you'd embarrass me like this." Her voice cracked, sharp, wounded, and more than anything exposed. She wasn't sorry. She was humiliated. Not by her actions, but by the fact that someone had dared to name them out loud. The silence after her outburst was more brutal than the outburst itself. Celeste stood at the podium, shoulders squared but trembling, her mouth still half open in disbelief as if she expected someone, anyone, to jump in and rescue her, to smooth over the damage, to redirect the moment with a laugh or a toast or a polite applause. But no one moved. No one clapped. No one came to her side. Even the event photographer lowered his camera. She turned toward Nathan, eyes wide, voice sharp. "This is her doing," she hissed, pointing at me. "This girl turned you against your own mother." I stood slowly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush the stage or point fingers or say anything cruel. I didn't have to. Instead, I said one sentence, quiet, even but strong enough to carry through the entire ballroom. "Lila gave you a gift." Celeste blinked. I stepped forward, just enough that she couldn't ignore my presence. "She gave you a chance," I continued, "to finally see her, to finally choose her, and you chose not to." That was when I saw it happen. Not in a dramatic collapse or a shattered scream, but in the small, splintering shifts of someone whose power had always depended on the illusion of control. Celeste's spine stiffened. Her lips pressed into a pale line. Her eyes flickered to the guesto, her colleagues, donors, friends all watching her unravel in real time. Some were whispering. Others were simply watching with the kind of uncomfortable stillness that settles over a room when no one wants to be caught reacting. And yet, everyone felt it. The fall. Not from a literal pedestal, but from the high, polished version of herself that Celeste had so carefully curated over decades. In that moment, the audience didn't see the philanthropic surgeon, the esteemed matriarch, the woman who ran charity auctions and hosted hospital benefits. They saw a grandmother who had just rejected her own granddaughter in front of 100 witnesses. They saw a mother who had blamed her daughter-in-law for speaking the truth. They saw a woman whose silence toward a child had finally turned into a scream heard by everyone. Celeste stumbled back from the podium, as if the ground itself was shifting beneath her heels. She reached for the edge of the table behind her, steadying herself on a champagne bucket. Maddie flinched. Lucas stopped chewing. Even Emma, the youngest, looked toward her father with a question in her eyes. And Nathan? He didn't move toward Celeste. He turned to Lila instead. He knelt beside her chair, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and said softly, "You were brave." I'm sick. That moment was small, but it broke something wide open. Because everyone saw it. He wasn't choosing legacy. He was choosing her. Celeste opened her mouth again, maybe to protest, maybe to beg, but Nathan was already standing, guiding Lila to her feet. I met them halfway. No dramatic exits, no storming off. Just the three of us, walking past the podium, past the tables, past the woman who once believed we'd never dare confront her. No one stopped us. No one asked questions. No one offered a goodbye. Because deep down, they all knew. What they had witnessed wasn't a betrayal. It was an ending. One that had been written slowly, quietly, over years of exclusion, and was now sealed in a moment that could never be undone. We didn't go back. Not the next day. Not the next week. Not even when the apology flowers arrived, tulips, in a vase the color of guilt. No note. There were no phone calls. No misunderstood texts. No family brunch invitations with polite emojis and veiled expectations. Just silence. And this time, the silence didn't hurt. It healed. Because for the first time in years, there was no walking on eggshells. No pretending. No running through mental gymnastics, trying to decode half-smiles and backhanded compliments. The storm had passed and we had walked out with our daughter's hand in ours and our dignity intact. At first, I thought Lila might ask about her. I waited for the questions, the late-night sadness, the quiet mourning of a relationship that never really had the chance to grow. But they never came. Instead, something in her began to open. She laughed more easily. She volunteered to set the table. She painted again messy, bold swirls of color that she taped to the fridge without asking permission. There was a new calmness in her, like her body finally believed it didn't have to fight for space in the world anymore. One afternoon, while folding laundry, Lila looked up and said, "Do you think other kids have grandmas who don't see them?" The question felt like a match dropped into dry leaves. I sat down beside her, the half-folded towel still in my hands. "Yes," I said quietly. "More than we'd like to admit." She nodded, then added, "Maybe we should help them." I looked at her, this 8-year-old with eyes like open windows and a heart far too wide for what she'd been through. And in that moment, the idea was born. Not from anger, not from vengeance, but from belonging, the kind that comes not by accident, not by birth, but by decision. We called it Belong by Choice, a small nonprofit. Quiet at first. We started with story circles, monthly meetups for kids navigating blended families, estranged relatives, complicated silences. We brought in therapists, storytellers, social workers. We printed cards that read, "You are not invisible. You never were. This is 80. Lila helped design the logo, a little gold heart inside a hand-drawn frame. She said it reminded her of the photo in the red box. We raised enough funds to create connection kits for kids going through custody transitions or step family adjustments. Inside each kit, a journal, art supplies, a book about chosen families, and a letter handwritten by another child who had been there too. We didn't talk about Celeste. We didn't need to, because this wasn't about her anymore. It was about the kids who sat quietly at tables where no one said their name. It was about the ones who received candles instead of care. About the girls in gold dresses who stopped bringing handmade gifts because they knew they'd end up on a forgotten side table. It was about building something that didn't ask children to earn love, but reminded them they were worthy of it, as they were, as they are. And, for the first time, Avery Morganwife, mother, invisible guest, was no longer shrinking. I was becoming something else entirely. Not out of rebellion, but out of clarity. People talk about belonging, like it's something you're handed. Like it's wrapped in a last name, a bloodline, a matching set of pajamas on Christmas morning. Like it's given to you if you behave, if you fit in, if you stay quiet long enough not to ruffle the edges. But that's not belonging. That's permission. And permission can be revoked. What Lila taught me, what an 8-year-old girl in a gold dress taught an entire ballroom full of grown adults, is that true belonging doesn't wait for approval. It doesn't sit politely in the corner hoping someone remembers your name. It doesn't shrink itself to fit someone else's comfort. Belonging stands up. It walks to the podium with shaking hands and steady eyes. It speaks when the room gets quiet. It places truth on a table like a gift and waits to see who's willing to open it. For too long, I believed I had to earn my seat. That if I was graceful enough, accommodating enough, quiet enough, I'd be allowed to stay. But silence isn't love. Tolerating someone isn't the same as welcoming them. And being present in a family photo doesn't mean you've been invited into the family. The day Lila handed Celeste that red box wasn't about revenge. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't even about justice. It was about clarity. It was about a little girl who had been ignored one time too many, finally realizing she didn't need to beg to belong. She already did, because she chose herself. And in doing so, she gave the rest of us permission to choose differently too. Nathan chose his daughter over tradition. I chose truth over appeasement. And Lilashay chose to stop waiting. Now, when I look at her, I don't just see my child. I see a mirror I didn't know I needed. She's not asking anymore. She's claiming. And that, to me, is the bravest thing a person can do in a world that constantly tries to tell you who's in and who's out. Die. So if you're listening to this and you've ever felt like a guest in your own family, if you've ever been told you don't count, don't belong, don't measure up, If you've ever sat at the far end of a table wondering if anyone would notice if you disappeared, hear this. You don't have to earn a place that should never have been conditional to begin with. You are not invisible. You are not a placeholder. You are not a maybe in someone else's story. You are yours. And sometimes, the most powerful kind of love is the kind you give to yourself when everyone else forgets. So take up space. Speak the truth. Stand at the podium, even if your hands shake. Because you don't have to beg to belong. Not anymore,